Pam Bondi and Jamie Raskin were never expected to clash like this. But the moment their names were spoken together, the mood inside the hearing room changed instantly. This wasn't ordinary tension. It felt like a line had been crossed, like something long hidden inside the Justice Department was finally being dragged into the open. As Raskin leaned forward, refusing to slow down or soften his words, one question hung heavy in the air. What happens when the Department of Justice stops behaving like the Department of Justice? Viewers watching in real time had no idea that the next few minutes would expose a pattern so troubling that even seasoned observers of Washington power began questioning how far the system had already drifted. When the chair recognized the ranking member of the committee, Jamie Raskin didn't waste a second easing into his remarks. He went straight to the heart of the issue. He began by listing actions that, taken together, painted a disturbing picture. The Department of Justice had announced it would downgrade enforcement of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, signaling that major corruption cases would no longer be a priority. At the same time, it fired 17 inspectors general, officials whose work had reportedly saved taxpayers more than $90 billion by identifying waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption across the federal government. These were not symbolic roles. These were watchdogs whose job was to hold power accountable. Raskin then turned to the sudden decision to drop the corruption prosecution of New York City. Mayor Eric Adams. That decision came shortly after Adams entered into a political alignment with Donald Trump. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Multiple prosecutors resigned in protest, including the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Danielle Sassoon, a conservative Republican and member of the Federalist Society. Her deputy resigned as well, stating bluntly that only a fool or a coward would submit to that kind of political pressure, but the list didn't stop there. Raskin pointed out that the Justice Department had weakened or dismantled entire units dedicated to integrity and accountability. The Public Integrity Unit was stripped down. The Kleptocracy Unit, designed to track and prosecute corrupt foreign elites, was dismantled. Other divisions focused on combating foreign interference in American politics were shut down entirely. Piece by piece, the infrastructure designed to protect democratic accountability was being taken apart. Then Raskin shifted gears and asked a question that cut through all the politics. He turned to Mr. Fox and asked why prosecuting white-collar crime matters, especially when those crimes involve clearly defined offenses with specific legal elements. Fox responded that while white-collar cases make up a smaller percentage of overall federal prosecutions, they fall squarely within the federal government's authority. More importantly, he said, they are essential for preventing political corruption and ensuring that people are prosecuted based on evidence, not political loyalty. Fox emphasized that public trust collapses when people believe the justice system targets individuals for their beliefs while protecting others because of their connections. When prosecution decisions appear to depend on who someone knows or which side they support, the system stops looking like justice and starts looking like favoritism. Raskin followed up with the inevitable question, does that kind of selective enforcement undermine trust in the justice system? Fox didn't hesitate. He said it absolutely does. It sends a message that there are two systems of justice in America. One system for ordinary people charged with everyday crimes like theft or assault, and another system for powerful white-collar criminals in government, corporations, or politics who can escape consequences if they have the right relationships. That moment landed hard, because it confirmed what many Americans already suspect but rarely hear acknowledged so plainly. When corruption prosecutions are dropped, watchdogs are fired, and accountability units are dismantled, the damage isn't abstract. It reshapes public faith in the rule of law itself. And once people believe the system protects the powerful while punishing everyone else, trust doesn't just erode. It collapses. This exchange wasn't about ideology. It wasn't about party lines. It was about whether the Justice Department still serves the law or whether it has begun serving power. And that's why the room felt different. Because what Raskin exposed wasn't a single bad decision. It was a pattern, a direction, And once that direction becomes clear, it forces a much harder conversation about what justice means in America today, though if you want more clear, fact-driven breakdowns of what's really happening inside these hearings. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Staying informed is the only way accountability survives. That point connected directly back to a question raised earlier by Ranking Member McBath. She had asked whether enforcement decisions would start focusing on people who lack the resources to fight back, while avoiding those with money, influence, or political protection. And that concern wasn't theoretical. It went to the heart of whether justice is applied evenly or selectively. The idea that prosecutors might choose easier targets simply because they can't afford long legal battles undermines confidence in the entire system. From there, the conversation shifted to a deeper structural issue inside federal law: intent. Specifically, whether criminal laws should require proof that a person actually meant to commit a crime. The witness explained that many regulatory offenses, and even some traditional statutory crimes, do not include a clear intent requirement known legally as mens rea. Without that requirement, people can be charged even when no reasonable person would believe a crime was committed. He gave a striking example. If someone were to pick up another person's water bottle on federal property and hand it to someone else, under a literal reading of certain federal statutes, that action could technically be charged as theft. That outcome is absurd. No reasonable person would believe that behavior reflects criminal intent. Yet without a clear explanation in the law requiring proof that someone intended to steal, ordinary people can become criminal defendants over harmless conduct. That kind of overreach does real damage. It creates fear and uncertainty. People begin to believe that the law is a trap rather than a safeguard. And once that perception takes hold, trust in the justice system erodes quickly. The witness agreed that this problem is compounded by the sheer explosion of federal crimes over time. Lawmakers themselves may not even know how many criminal offenses exist. Across the federal code, this led to discussion of proposals, like the Count the Crimes Act, which aims to simply identify and catalog every federal criminal offense. The idea sounds basic, but it highlights how out of control the system has become. When no one can even count the crimes, it becomes impossible to evaluate whether all of them belong in criminal law at all. From there came the logical next question. Once those crimes are identified, should Congress eliminate many of the regulatory offenses that transform technical rule violations into criminal acts? Offenses that most people would never associate with real wrongdoing. The response was clear. Pairing a crime-counting effort with broad intent reform could dramatically reduce unjust prosecutions. Setting a default requirement that prosecutors must prove intent would prevent people from being swept into the criminal system for actions they never knew were illegal. The witness also suggested another safeguard if legislative reform proves difficult. Juries already have the power to acquit when justice demands it, even if the technical elements of a charge are met. In cases where the prosecution itself feels unreasonable or detached from common sense, jurors can and should reject it. That authority exists for a reason, to serve as a final check against misuse of prosecutorial power. As the witness wrapped up, he joked about yielding his time before accidentally committing a criminal offense by speaking too long. The humor landed because it underscored the very point being made. When laws are overly broad and intent is ignored, even harmless behavior can be framed as criminal. What caused this moment to explode across social media wasn't the exchange itself, but what it revealed underneath. Under Pam Bondi's leadership, the Department of Justice quietly made a move that stunned legal experts. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the law used to prosecute international bribery and corporate corruption, wasn't strengthened, reviewed, or debated. It was deprioritized, pushed aside, demoted. And for many watching, that decision confirmed a growing fear that accountability at the highest levels is being weakened. Not by accident, but by design. And then came the next move, one that raised even more alarm. Almost overnight, 17 inspectors general were removed from their positions. These were not low-level officials. These were independent watchdogs whose job was to expose waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption inside the federal government. Just 1 year earlier, their work had saved taxpayers nearly $91 billion. They were the guardrails, the early warning system, the people tasked with asking uncomfortable questions and following the money wherever it led. Their sudden removal didn't feel random. It felt deliberate. There was no detailed explanation, no public justification, no clear rationale offered to the American people. One day they were there. The next day, they were gone. And when accountability disappears without explanation, speculation fills the vacuum. Online discussions exploded. Some believed the firings were meant to test loyalty. Others suggested internal pressure campaigns or quiet demands behind closed doors. None of it was proven. None of it confirmed. But the rumors spread fast for a reason. When institutions stop communicating, trust collapses. Even experienced legal analysts admitted the move looked troubling. It didn't resemble routine restructuring or performance-based decisions. It looked like a deliberate clearing of anyone whose job involved oversight. A room being emptied of people who might object, question, or document wrongdoing. And that perception alone was damaging enough, but the most serious moment came when Congressman Raskin pointed to a corruption case that didn't just slow down. It disappeared. A high-profile investigation involving a major city leader quietly evaporated. Prosecutors who had worked the case for months walked away. Not one or two. 6 or 7 attorneys resigned, including the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, Danielle Sassoon, a conservative lawyer affiliated with the Federalist Society and a Republican. Resignations at that level are rare. They don't happen over paperwork disputes. They happen when professionals believe the integrity of the process has been compromised. No official statement ever spelled out what happened. But Raskin said what many were already thinking. The case ended shortly after a political alliance was formed. No further subpoenas. No continuation. No explanation. The timing alone raised red flags. And for anyone watching closely, it was impossible to ignore. That's when the pattern became impossible to dismiss. As that case vanished, so did entire DOJ units designed to combat corruption. The public integrity section was hollowed out. The kleptocracy unit was dismantled. Offices focused on stopping foreign interference in American politics were shut down. Each decision removed another layer of protection. Another checkpoint meant to stop abuse of power before it spreads. Legal experts warned that this wasn't just unusual. It was dangerous. Taking apart oversight mechanisms while insisting everything is normal is like disabling fire alarms and telling people the building is safe. Without watchdogs, accountability becomes optional. Investigations move forward or die based on politics instead of evidence. Justice stops being consistent and starts being selective. That's the context behind what Mr. Fox explained next. White-collar crime and public corruption cases make up only about 7% of federal prosecutions. But their importance far outweighs their size. These cases are how the system proves that power doesn't place anyone above the law. And when those cases are deprioritized, dismantled, or quietly buried, public trust doesn't just weaken. It collapses, and once that trust is gone, the damage spreads far beyond any single hearing room. That 7% figure mattered more than it sounded. The crimes that genuinely require federal authority, large-scale fraud, public corruption, corporate misconduct, were already being pursued less aggressively than street-level offenses long before these units were dismantled. Now, with the teams responsible for handling them reduced or eliminated, that number was expected to shrink even further. This wasn't a routine policy adjustment. It was a fundamental shift in what the justice system chooses to care about. Fox laid out the danger plainly. A legal system starts to decay when it applies one set of rules to ordinary people and another to those with wealth, power, or political connections. When everyday citizens face prosecution for minor violations while influential figures avoid scrutiny entirely, justice stops being justice. It becomes privilege enforcement. And the real threat, he argued, isn't petty crime or isolated acts of violence. It's the quiet normalization of immunity at the top. Raskin pushed the point further. When the public watches powerful individuals walk away untouched while others are punished harshly for technical or accidental violations, confidence in the rule of law collapses. Once that confidence is gone, equal justice becomes a slogan rather than a reality. Laws lose moral authority. Compliance turns into fear, not trust. That concern deepened when the discussion turned to mens rea, the legal requirement to prove intent. This is where the implications became truly unsettling. A startling number of federal crimes do not require prosecutors to show that someone meant to break the law. In many cases, intent is irrelevant. You can be convicted simply for committing the act, even if you had no idea it was illegal. Fox illustrated this with a deliberately simple example. On federal property, taking a water bottle and handing it to someone else could technically satisfy the elements of theft under certain statutes. It sounds ridiculous, because it is. But without an intent requirement, absurd outcomes become legally possible. And once absurdity enters the criminal code, discretion becomes everything. Who gets charged and who gets ignored? Most people watching had no idea how extensive this problem is. The federal criminal code has expanded into tens of thousands of offenses. So many, in fact, that Congress cannot say with certainty how many federal crimes exist. Laws have accumulated for decades, overlapping, duplicating, and contradicting each other. Some are rarely enforced. Some are vaguely written. Some are so broad they can be applied almost anywhere, if someone decides to stretch them. Raskin referenced a bipartisan effort known as the Count the Crimes Act, designed to do something that should be basic in any democracy: figure out how many crimes are actually on the books. The disturbing part wasn't the proposal itself. It was the admission that lawmakers don't know the answer. When laws become too numerous to count, the system stops being governed by clear rules and starts operating through selective enforcement, and selective enforcement is where power becomes dangerous. That's why Raskin raised an idea that makes many judges uncomfortable but has deep roots in American history, reminding jurors that they retain the power to acquit even when the evidence technically supports a conviction. Known as jury nullification, this principle exists as a last safeguard against unjust laws or abusive prosecutions. It's rarely acknowledged in courtrooms, but it has always existed. Fox argued that this safeguard may be more necessary now than ever. When prosecutors bring charges that no reasonable person would consider criminal in spirit, jurors may be the final barrier against injustice. Because when intent is removed, oversight is dismantled, and enforcement becomes selective. The only remaining defense against abuse may rest not with institutions, but with ordinary citizens sitting in the jury box. And that realization left many viewers with an uneasy thought. The danger facing the justice system isn't just who gets prosecuted. It's who gets protected and how quietly that protection is being built into the system itself. It was a radical thing to say in such a serious setting, but it landed with force because people immediately grasped the implications. If the justice system keeps expanding vague, technical crimes while dismantling oversight of real corruption, then ordinary citizens may become the final safeguard against unjust prosecutions. And then the moment turned almost surreal. As Raskin wrapped up, he joked about not wanting to commit an infraction by going over his allotted time. The room laughed, but the line carried more weight than anyone expected, because the idea that speaking too long could be an infraction wasn't entirely a joke. It was a sharp reminder of how, in a system flooded with technical violations, almost anything can be twisted into a crime if someone is determined enough. That single line captured the entire crisis. A justice system so bloated with vague rules and so hollowed out where oversight should exist that even lawmakers feel like they're walking on thin ice. But for many watching, the most chilling thought was this: if this is what we're seeing in public hearings, under cameras and sworn testimony, what's happening behind closed doors? Online discussions exploded almost immediately. Legal analysts warned that weakening anti-corruption enforcement, while shielding political allies, follows. a familiar and dangerous blueprint one seen in other countries before long-term institutional decay sets in. Commentators pointed out that once public trust fractures, it is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. And anonymous insiders began whispering that morale inside the department was already collapsing. Speculation grew about internal pressures, loyalty expectations, and silent directives shaping decisions in ways no memo or policy document would ever capture. None of this has been proven. But the very fact that such speculation spreads so easily tells its own story, because when people start relying on rumors to explain government behavior, the real problem isn't the rumors. It's the absence of transparency that allows them to thrive. That's the heart of this moment. Pam Bondi's Department of Justice isn't just facing criticism. It's facing a legitimacy crisis. When enforcement becomes selective, when oversight disappears, when career prosecutors resign rather than participate, the message becomes impossible to ignore. Accountability is no longer guaranteed. And the consequences don't stop in Washington. They ripple outward into courtrooms, communities, and everyday conversations across the country. People begin to wonder whether justice is something that can be negotiated, delayed, or quietly abandoned depending on who stands to benefit. Once that doubt takes hold, it's almost impossible to erase. So as the hearing ended and Raskin yielded his time, viewers weren't left with answers. They were left with a question, one that grows heavier with every new revelation. If the institution, designed to protect justice, stops protecting it, who will? Because the longer these patterns continue, the harder it becomes to convince anyone that the system still functions the way it claims to. Let me know what you think in the comments. This story isn't finished, not even close. And if this breakdown helped clarify what's really at stake, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and stay tuned. The next deep dive goes even further, and you won't want to miss it.